Okay. Let's now go and try to, in this session, I just want to talk about and practice a little bit of JavaScript functions. And I'm hoping that we can try to cover the process of declaring a function in JavaScript. And we all know that functions are pretty useful in different programming languages, and most of the time, if you are already aware or you have already learned how to declare a JavaScript or let's say a function in one programming language, it will be easy for you to transition to another programming language. So now, for the objectives for this session, I just want to go and learn how to talk about declaring a JavaScript function and learn how to identify a JavaScript expression. So let's try to go and create a new file here. Let's say let's first open our terminal also. I just want to, and then here let's try to create a new file. JS function declaration. Let's just complete this. Yes. Let's put that there. So if you remember, if we went to our node terminal, and let's try to go check out that console. So it says here that this is an object. And if we go to that log, we have that property accessory method or accessory operator. And I believe we talk about operators. So let's go, just close our MD file here. Also close this and this. I think we weren't able to add that here. Here. Member accessory operator. Accessory operator, which is the dot. Or property accessory or methods accessory. We can actually add here. We want to access methods, properties, if through the use of that, and even functions. We can utilize that for, or basically a method is a function. So you would see that dot log is part of the console object. So we have an object. We'll talk more about objects as we move forward with some of our discussions. And once we use the member accessory operator, we get that log method, which is a function that has been written by JavaScript developers or who worked on creating the language. So that's one example. Let's just get out of here. Control C twice. Just close this. Yes, save that. So in the simplest form, A function is basically, let's try to have some notes here. It is a block of code that is designed to perform a particular task. And it is also a function can be executed when something invokes it or calls it. Okay, so later we'll see how that works. And it is a block of code that we, the programmers, can name. And then call. Okay, so that's the basic idea of what a function. Let's say, for example, function test. So you would see we have an example of a function here. We have the use of the function keyword, and then we have this test. I can name this rod. I can name this any name that I would want. That will be representing whatever function. Play, that can be pause, ball, so ball, move ball, for example. So you would see that's just something to take note of when we're working with functions. So first, it is a block of code. So you would see we have here function test, and we have a block of code, and here we have instructions go here, or we can say that instructions go here, and then we can try to call this now, and or we sometimes can call it invoking a function. We can invoke a function so once we are trying to call it, right? Test and invoke it. So that's a very basic explanation of what a function is. And we can do a lot of things with the use of a function. In JavaScript, this is going to be one of the primary construct. So this is one of the most primary construct in the JavaScript language for you to be able to accomplish certain things or goals that you have in your application. Let's say, so we have function test here. Let's say we want to return, so we have a return statement here, and then let's say num1, num2, and then let's try to use num1 multiplied by num2. So you would see we are passing in parameters, and we're using this return statement for us to be able to return and do some sort of evaluation. that should be evaluating whatever values that we have stored in these parameters, two parameters that we have inside of our function test. So these are just like variables from where we can try to store value. But in this case, these are serving as placeholders for values that we will be passing in as an argument to the function that we would want to invoke. So if in this case, we would want to test this out, let's say 1. Let me just check if this will work. Let's go inside of our 04. Nope, 05, sorry. 05 JS functions. And let's run JS function declaration. Are we going to counter any error here? We did not get anything because I think we're returning num1 multiplied by num2. I think we'll need to console.log. If we wanted to, let's just store this to product. Let product assign the value of num1 and num2. Console.log product. Let's see if this is going to work now. We get that value of 10. So that's one example of, so again, these are just parameters. We're assigning or initializing the evaluation of whatever we wanted to compute between the two numbers here, and we're assigning it inside of that. Am I correct? Result of, yep, that's correct. I sometimes doubt myself. So result of a multiplication operation will be a product. So we call that a product. We declare the variable and then we log it here on our console using the object. Then we access the method, which is another function that has been built in the JavaScript language. And we're passing in the value of num1 and num2 so that we can try to output. So if I try to replace this with 5, what will happen? We get 5 multiplied by 5, that's 25. So let's try to create another example here. So this is just one example. Let's try to break down the JavaScript function syntax. So we define a JavaScript function with the use of the function keyword. That's the first thing that you will need to do. Then you can have an identifier or a name for us to be able to declare what we want to call that function. So let's have a function name. And then we will be having, we have an option to pass in parameters inside of the function invocation operators, which are the open and closed parentheses. So we follow a function name. So this is actually how we declare a function. This is what we call function declaration. So if you try to read through a code base, you will find this as the process of declaring a name or an identifier. Similar with variables, like in a variable, we declare a variable a this way, right? We declare a variable. And here we're declaring a function name. Okay, so just have that in mind. And then we, of course, will need to have a code block. And some things to take note of when it comes to function names will be first, it can contain letters, it can contain digits, it can contain underscores, it can contain dollar signs. So almost similar with when we are declaring a variable. Okay, so that's one of the things that we can do. So let's say here we have a function name, declare name. Okay, so I'm just going to create this. So let's try to put this variable declaration inside of our function declaration. Here's our, let's put this here. Then let's have our variable. Let's have a console.log. And let's just have some. So you would see if we try to run this, what are we going to see on our console? I think we need to invoke it. So you would see, as I mentioned earlier, we need to call it, because if we don't call the function, then it will not run. So we are able to log those hyphens on our output, on our terminal here, right? So let's first try to commit this. Add examples, first example or second example of function declaration. So in this case, we have that those hyphens or dashes being displayed on the console, but we are not using the variable yet in our case. So let's say we would want to go and put here, by the way, let's just have a template, but I'm going to comment this out. We can pass in parameters here, parameters, parameter 1, parameter 2. And these are just like, as I mentioned, these are like variables or a placeholder from where you can try to replace whatever value that will be inputted by a user. For example, let's say in our case, we want to declare a name here, but or in the first example that we had here, we had num1, num2, and we passed in some arguments. We call this arguments because these are values that we can try to put inside of the function invocation operators, which is the open and the closed parenthesis, and we can replace that depending on whatever we want to multiply based on the instructions that we are writing inside of the code block. Okay. So those parameters, or let me just put here, parameters are listed, the parenthesis, for a function definition, just as a note that we can have here. And here we have what we call function arguments, which are values that is received when we invoke and or call the function. Okay. So some notes when we are, this is a way we can try to function invocation. These are some ways on how we can try to invoke a function. And some notes that we can try to put here when we are trying to invoke a function. Number 1, when an event occurs, such as a user clicks a button, for example. Number 2, when it is invoked or called from a JavaScript code. Or we do what we call an IFI later on. We will be talking about IFI later on. Doing self-invoke or automatically invoking itself. Okay, so those are just some things that we have to be aware of when we're calling the function. Once we try to click a button on the user interface from the web browser, or once we try to call it from a function, and that's what we're doing here right now, we can actually try to create an example of this. Perhaps we can try to or perhaps later we can try to work on creating a function inside of the browser that we can try to play around with. So if we try to go and put here prompt. So again, it says here function prompt message, and we're passing in string. And if we try to use this method, string undefined. So let's have here enter your name here. Let's see what will happen. And then console.log hello. Let's concatenate the variable that we have declared, and let's try to use that variable that we've declared here. Will this work? I think I made some mistakes here. Let's first try to see prompt enter your name here. I think we should use this in an index.html. Let's have a h1. And let's have a script tag from where we're going to call the JS function declaration.js here. If we try to open this up on the browser, let's see. What will this be? Okay. Let's refresh. Enter your name here. So you would see in the function that we've written inside of our JS function declaration, we created a function called, the name that we've used here is declare name. We declare the function name. That will serve as an identifier. And again, this can be any customized name that you can use, right? Introduced, for example. Of course, we need to replace that with introduce here. And then let's try to see if that will still work. Will that still work on our browser if we try to work on this, right? If we don't invoke it here, what will happen? Will this still work? Let's see. It's no longer happening because we're not calling it. We need to call it from our JavaScript code. So we're calling it from our JavaScript code. Introduce yourself. Yes. Enter your name. Right? So I replaced the declare a name. And again, this can be something that you will be. So here we have prompts. I think it's better to run it on the browser rather than on Node. So we have that name, and if we try to pass in rod, what will happen? I think because we are not, we can try to go to our function.html. I think we can replace that. Let's rename this with function.html. Or better if we call it function declaration. Hello plus name. And we can go to inspect element and console. We get that undefined. That's because we just reopen that. We're getting an undefined. Let's see. Hello name. That's because we're not storing. We're only prompting it. Let's try to check some examples of how to use that prompt method. Let's store it inside of our let's see if we can try to say we get the information there. So enter your name here and or your name here, let's say. I think we can try to use this instead. Let's try that out. Sometimes, and there we go. In this case, we are trying to get the name from the user, from the browser. Let's refresh that. Let's just say first name. Enter your first name here. Your first and last name here. Let's refresh. And then Rodrigo Lopez. We get that Rodrigo Lopez being prompted there, right? So we've already declared our variable, but we didn't initialize it with a value. So here we're getting the next instruction, which is to have those console.log. And then we are storing, we're initializing or assigning a value to the name variable. And we're passing in here the prompt method in JavaScript that prompted us with information here. And we're asking the user, that's why the user now has an ability to interact with our program for us to be able to log on the console the value that we have stored inside, which is a string, inside of the prompt method, we got that from the user. We stored that inside of the name variable, and we are concatenating it with a string literal plus the name variable that has the information that the user has given us on the browser. So let's try to add that working introduce function here. So one thing that you would notice, let's have another example. So here we're using the browser for us to be able to implement this. So to create another function here. But this time let's have, say, hello. Let's copy this. So you'll see this is going to be executed line by line. I can try to play around with this with a little bit. Let's have another console.log. Hello everyone. We need a backspace for that. Rod. Will this work on the console? Most probably the one that we have on top here will not be working on our node environment. You see where prompt is not defined, so let's comment this out for the meantime. And I always forget calling the function. Hello everyone, I'm Rod, and I am able to print out all of each of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines of code from 56 to 61. So this is the code block, and this is representing the instructions that we're writing inside of our function declaration with the name of say hello, or an identifier that we're using, and we're calling that function by using the name that we have declared here on line 55 after the function keyword. So this is what we call, again, this style is what we call a function declaration, or we're defining a function here. So you'll see it's similar with how we, again, function declarations will be similar with how we declare variables, our variable names. And we are saying that this is going to be a function that we want to call later on. That's why we're adding that parenthesis, and we're giving it the instructions that we want to give our application here, so that the compiler will understand that we want to run the console object and then log the hyphen here and the string literal that we have here on our console. So it's like a container. This code block here is like a container of instructions that you're adding information, or instructions that you're giving the compiler on how to run your code. So this code block, open and close curly brackets here, is defining. So just take note. Curly brackets are like containers for instructions. Code blocks, these are called code blocks. In most programming languages, you will be encountering the word code blocks. It contains the body of the function. Anything inside the curly brackets that can be a JavaScript statement or expression that we've talked about, it can contain. Curly brackets can contain JavaScript statements or expressions, as we've discussed in our previous examples here. And here, this is invoke and use the function. That's what we're doing here. We're calling it so that we can try to run it inside of our terminal here. And here we are trying to run it. In this case, we're running it. Invoke this function inside of the browser. Let's copy this and let's put this inside of our function declaration script, so that, and this one we can just comment that out. You can use control plus / for you to make a comment. Let's just close this with a script tag. This should now still be working. And there we go. It's now still working. Let's try to format this document. So this one is, we're just calling the code that we've written here through the use of the file JS function that is inside of this folder, JS function. But we wanted to embed it so that, because we commented out this code, this browser-based code now is not the runtime environment from where we're testing these instructions that we're trying to invoke inside of the browser. This one, invoke and use the function inside of the node runtime environment. Okay, so here we have the function inside of the browser runtime environment. Okay, so we're invoking in two places. I just wanted to clarify what we're trying to accomplish here. Let's save this. So that's the process of invoking a function. We need to call the name or the identifier for us to be able to call it in different runtime environments. In our case, we're calling it from the browser. First one that we have here and here. And the other one, we're invoking it and calling it inside of the node environment. Okay. So I hope that that's quite clear. Let's go back. So that's the process of invoking. Let's clear this. Oops, sorry. We can also initialize or assign a value. Sorry, that's my dog. I have a lot of dogs here. And let's try to store a function inside of a variable. Let me just resize this one more time. Let's say, let's create another function. And most of the time, you would see function declarations are in camel case. So let's say I would want to store, or what can we call this? Let's say, let's have, say, store in variable function. We want to invoke this inside of variable. Let name is assigned the value of rod. Or let's say, let's do console.log. Hello. I'm a function stored inside of a variable. So what we're going to do here, let's just end that statement. Let's declare a variable a, and let's store in variable so that we can try to reference this. We want to call store a function inside of a variable declaration. So what we're doing, we created a function here. We will be invoking it. We're going to get this piece of information, or the name and the function invocation operator, and then we're going to assign it inside of that variable a that we have here. So if we wanted to call this or invoke this, we can just go and now try to use this variable identifier or variable name. Again, this is the variable name declaration. We can replace that with store if we want as a customized store word, right? But let's try to make it a lot shorter just by Usually when we declare our variables, we want that to be a bit of descriptive, but for now I just wanted to show you this. At least once you run through reading some code base, you'll be able to at least try to understand what's happening. Why do we have an A there? Most probably there's an A and then there's this open and close parenthesis. Once you see this in some code that other developers have developed, some other developers have developed, it would probably be it can be a variable, it can be an array, or in this case, if you see an invocation operator or function invocation operator, open and close parenthesis, that might be a function that we need to figure out where the instructions are hidden inside of a code base that you're working on. So most probably that's the idea there. Me, I personally am still trying to improve my code base reading skills. That's why I'm also trying to teach whatever we're discussing here right now. And I think this is a good way for you to figure things out when you're reading a code base, right? So in this case, we are stored a function and invoke it by using the variable name declaration that we have. Okay, so what will happen if we try to invoke this? I'm a function stored inside of a variable. Node JS function declaration. A is not a function. Store in variable. What happened? Why is this not working? It's telling us that it is not a function. Oh, I think we don't need the function invocation operator. There we go. Sorry guys, you just need to call it this way, okay? Let's try to comment out. So you'll see there's that. Let's comment this out first. The one that we're calling, say hello there. Just to be... Let's save this. Hello, I'm a function stored inside of a variable. And we're invoking it this way, you know? Or we're just invoking. Can we remove the parenthesis there? I'm a function inside of a variable. We don't need to console.log it anymore, because normally if we did not have a console.log here, we'll need to console.log a here, right? Let's say, for example, if we try not to... Or let's just create another function just to demonstrate. I'm just going to close that with a statement, a parenthesis, or actually we can just keep it there. Let's have a console.log. Let's just see. I'm just trying to experiment here, guys. And let's call this store variable 2. Let's have b. Let b is assigned the value store variable 2, and let's try to invoke it already inside of that variable b. And let's replace this with a return statement. I think we can try to put a string here rather than... Hello, I'm a function stored inside of a variable displayed through a console.log inside of a function. Okay, and this one returned, displayed through a return statement inside of function. Okay, so let's try to play around with this. Let's try to see what that will be doing for us. Okay, so that's working. Function, hello, I'm a function stored inside of a variable displayed through a console.log inside of a function. And this one, we're using the return statement for us to be able to display these strings and return those string literals, this sentenced inside of a function through the use of the return statement. So basically, this is a return statement here. Let's talk about return statement. But let's first try to commit this, right? Add or create store variable 2 inside of variable and use console and return statement. Let's push that. So I hope that this is clear, whatever we're doing here. I think we need to, let me just open a Git. That's where we're having that stage. Just going to use Git here, and then let's go back here for our clear. Now let's have another example here. And earlier we had this say hello. And let's go create another function here. But let's first talk about the function return here. So this return statement, let's just have a comment here. Return statement. So this return statement that we have return keyword will, or let's say if a function, if the JS function reaches the return statement, this will stop executing the instructions inside of the code block. So if we wanted to go and return values from function, let's try to have a function calculate value here, for example. Let's have function calculate tax. And let's pass in an amount parameter inside of the function invocation operator. And let's say I would want to have a result, send the value of amount multiplied by how much is the added tax in the Philippines. 12%. Why are we getting this? Multiplied by 12. Value added tax, services by the government controlled corporation. So there's that 12%, for example. And we would want to return the result. This to here. We get the amount and then we multiply it by 12. Then let's have a let VAT is assigned the value of calculate VAT. I think it's better if we try to use VAT, value added tax here, right? Then let's put, let's say 100. How much will be the, let's console.log that VAT. We get, I think that should be 0.12. I think that's a little too high. So we get 12. Is that correct? I'm just checking out here. I'm just checking out some examples here for computing that. But technically, if we wanted to calculate, we pass in an amount here. Let's say we have 1,000. How much will be the value we get? We get 120 for the value of the calculation that we have. So what we can try to, we get that 120, right? Let's just say, I'll just open up calculator here. Yep, that's doing a multiplication for the 0.12. I'm not sure if that's how VAT is calculated here in our country. So we need to, of course, look at the process on how to do that correctly, right? But that's just the idea here. We can use the return statement. We're returning whatever evaluation that we want to compute in this amount parameter that we have passed in, and then we can pass in an argument of the value. Then we will be getting the multiplied result, and we are storing it inside of this variable declaration that we've made that has the result variable, and we're returning that output on our console. So that's a way to utilize the return statement. And if we try to go and work on, let's have a much simpler example here for using the return statement. And let's say let's again use the say hello function, and let's pass in a parameter this time. Let name, or I think we don't need to. Let's have a console.log hello plus name plus string say hello Rod Josh digs. Let's see what that will be producing in our console. So we get that hello Rod Josh. I think we can try to remove that. Hello Rod Josh digs. And that's the beauty of using function. We can try to reuse code and change the value of the parameter that we're passing in, similar with what we did here. But in this case, we're passing in strings. Here, we're passing in an argument that contains integers. So that's what we're doing here. And again, I hope that the return statement, our return keyword is clear. It's allowing us to return a value. We're able to display that value of the computation that we're doing inside of line 93 here, that we're storing inside of the result, and we're returning the output of that result on the terminal through the use of the return statement. And this is a good example of an expression. Now, let's move forward with, let's say, another thing to take note of once we work with functions, and that will be having a function expression. So let's first try to go here and commit this. Let's create a new file, and let's call that funcexpression.js. So things that we can try to say based on what we have covered already: function declaration and variable declaration are similar, that needs an identifier or name, so that we can try to call, reassign a value to them, right? But however, what if we don't need a name in our function? So let's say we just need a function, and we don't need that identifier. So we have what we call an anonymous function. Sometimes you might hear anonymous function. What if we don't need an identifier? What are the things that we can try to work on? So we can just create a function expression, in this case, function expression. Let me just let's try to use a method that is already inside of JavaScript here, for us to be able to. So this is an example of anonymous function. Examples of anonymous function. Let's try to, let me just open up here. You would see that there are plenty of examples of an anonymous function. You would see there's that function that doesn't have a name, right? So in our case, let's try to use an anonymous function, and one good way to demonstrate this will be to use the setTimeout method. And inside of that, so again, this is a method just to confirm what is that setTimeout. Let's go to node. Can we find okay, setTimeout. So this is just a method or a function inside of the JavaScript language. So just have that in mind. Just wanted to confirm that. So we can see that it's a function that we're seeing there. So if we try to use setTimeout, it's telling us it's a function setTimeout handler timer handler. Alright, this is one of those methods that we can use for asynchronous implementation, but we'll talk more about that as we move forward with some of our examples further. So we'll need a handler here. Again, there's that parameter that we can pass in, and again, whatever we put inside of the function invocation operator here, we can pass in parameters inside of it. So let's say we go and have a handler. Let's try to use a anonymous function as a handler. Let's try to have this console.log. Two seconds. We'll need to pass in. We have a handler and then we have a timer, and we will need to utilize here milliseconds. So again, a function declaration is us having a name identifier like the ones that we have here. Say hello, calculate that, store in variable. We have say hello again. And in this case, we don't have that identifier. And we're just creating a function expression in this case instead of a function declaration. So this is an example of a function expression example. And we're giving it a timeout, which is, in this case, we have this parameter. So it's like set timeout. We have a function. If we are going to write this in a single line, console.log (2000 milliseconds). So let's try to write console.log hello world. So this is just like in this sequence. So you would see we have the function keyword. We don't have a function name, so this is what we call a function expression that we're going to be passing in inside of our setTimeout method. We have that code block that will be running the instruction from where we're running the console.log. And then we're passing in a second argument, which is 2000 milliseconds, which is equivalent to 2 seconds. That will be similar to this, but we just clean this up a little bit so that it will be a lot easier for us to read. But this should be executing the same way if we try to run this. So this is going to be the body. So this is our body of our function expression. Let's try to run this first, just to check out. I think we need to run the function expression.js. Set is not defined. Set, we have this set here. That's wrong. Usually the runtime environment 1, 2, 1, 2, right? So let's try to run that one more time. 1, 2. That's because, let's say we want to run this at least 3 milliseconds. 1, 2, 3. And there we go. I waited for 3 seconds. 1, 2, hello world, 3. Let's make this 4 seconds just to at least. It's a bit difficult to read this in an inline, in a single line. That's why we break it down this way. First line will be the setTimeout method opening, then the function expression, and the body of the function expression, and then we're passing in a second argument inside of our setTimeout method, which is the number of seconds that we want to run before we run whatever instructions we're giving the compiler. 1, 2, 3, 4. I waited for 4 seconds because before this got displayed. And usually if you're nesting information like this, you can actually write comments. But we'll talk about that if we try to work on nested code already, especially functions, once we try to create some if statements later on or in our succeeding sessions. So you would see functions can take in functions as input parameters. Let's try to create both a function declaration and a function expression in this next example that we have. Let's have a let counter variable, assign the value of 0. Let's have a function timeout. Let's use this set timeout method. Let's try to clean this up a little bit so that we can try to read it much more clearly. Then let's have in our console.log test plus counter. And let's try to increment that using the increment operator. Then let's try to run, sorry for that. Let's try to run the timeout function declaration inside of it. In 6 seconds, basically we want to run this function timeout. Let's call that function timeout and invoke it. Let's try to see if what will happen here. 1, 2, hello world, 3, 4, 5, 6. Test counter value 0, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you would see it's incrementing the value of the counter continuously here after every 6 seconds. This will increment the value of the counter every after 6 seconds. So from the background, it's waiting 6 seconds before it runs. It's scheduling the next time the code will be running in here inside of the code block of our function, anonymous function expression here. So I'm hoping the sequence on what's happening in our example here, you're getting the sequence here. So let's try to get out of this timer by Control C for us to stop whatever that timer is doing. Now, what I want to do next is to create what we call an IFI, or immediately invoked function expression. And we talked about earlier in our function declaration here that we can do a self-invoke or automatically invoke the function on itself, right? So let's see what will happen if I go create this, open and close parenthesis. Let's close that. Then inside of that, we'll create a function anonymous without a name. Let's put this on the proper line. Let's have another open and close parenthesis so that we can immediately invoke our function. And we can run here what we call console.log function expression. This is an example of self-invoke invoked. So you will see we are not creating a function declaration here because we don't have a name. We have a function expression. You might hear some people calling this anonymous function because it doesn't have an identifier. And if you try to run this, function clear function node function expression.yes. You'll see it's the first one that got invoked. It immediately invoked this function. You would see it's invoking that. Then afterwards, it invoked the 2 seconds, 4 seconds, and then the counter. Even though this function is written at the bottom part of our instructions to the computer. And as I've mentioned in the past, lines of codes a line of codes that we write will be executed and read line by line. And usually, based on the order, this is the one that's getting executed first, then this one, or let's say this one, then this one. It will be read by the compiler, then this one, until it reaches the last line of code that you've written. However, in this case, the first one that it invoked is this what we call an immediately invoke function expression. You will see a lot of examples of this, especially if you're going to be working with JavaScript, especially when you're out there. Yeah, I'm hoping that once you try to encounter, or when you get to encounter the syntax, you will know and you will be able to identify, oh, okay, this is a function, immediately invoke function expression that we're encountering here, or an IFI. This will definitely be going to be a common pattern in JavaScript that you will be encountering once you are already developing JavaScript applications. So I think that's it for this session. I hope you learned a lot in our JavaScript function examples here, and you got some ideas here when it comes to functions. And we will be utilizing this a lot in our exercises, and we'll talk more about scoping inside of functions, global and function scope, as we move forward with some of the other examples that we will be working with once we try to work with our function exercises here, or other exercises that we have here. Add function expression IFI example. Let's push that to our repository. That's it, and thank you everyone, and see you on our next session.